What does shave and a haircut have to do with how Beethoven ended his music? Stick around for the rabbit hole, and I'll get to that part later. But first, let's have another look at the Captain Obvious G7 chord. There are 3 inversions of the G7 chord, in addition to the snowman chord, and they are slash chords. There is G7, G7/B, G7/D, and G7/F. To finish the whole thing, we get back to the G7 chord again, but an octave higher than where we started. This is exactly how I was taught to practice inversions for dominant 7 chords, always going up. But it turns out it is equally logical to go the other way by playing G7, G7/F, G7/D, G7/B to get back to the G7 chord in root position 1 octave lower. It's important to remember that music is as likely to go down as it is to go up, but I had to find that out on my own. There are other ways to get to these inversions that are more direct. To get from G7 to G7/B, we invert our chord up 1 time, and that's the easiest way to get to it. To get from G7 to G7/F, we want to do the same thing but in the other direction. We simply invert our chord down 1 time. And finally, to get to G7/D, we invert 2 times going up or 2 times going down. Either way works. And with this, you can now get from the root position G7 chord to the other 3 positions that have slashes. So if you can master this and do this in all 12 keys, you are pretty much done and you have mastered something extremely important. If you are comfortable with everything that I have covered so far, you can stop right here. Beep, 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 that's all, folks. Now comes the rabbit hole, and I think this one is going to be fun. We are going to use shave and a haircut for a super cool way to play 5/7-1. It turns out that at the end of shave and a haircut, we have a G7/D chord going to a C major chord with an octave on top, and that's the 2 bits part. In the first half of this video, we got from G7 to the G7/D chord by either inverting up 2 times or inverting down 2 times. This works, but it's a slow boat to China. There is a better way. You play a tone with the G on the top. Then you add a fat tone below the tone and a bitone above the tone. That way you get to the same place, but it is much faster. Let's quickly review Captain Obvious G7 going to C/G. That's the 5/7-1 idea that I have been teaching all of my students first, and that's not going to change. But what about the last 2 chords for shave and a haircut, the 2 bits part? Let's call this the 2 bits solution. It's really the same thing as the Captain Obvious solution, but it starts from an inversion of the G7 chord and moves to a really strong final 1 chord with the octave on top. Now I'm going to play the Captain Obvious solution several times and follow it up at the end with the 2 bits chords. Voila! We have a typical Beethoven ending, just like he used for hundreds of his compositions. Furthermore, we have a great way to practice the most common ending used by all composers for several hundred years. That means you will hear the same ending in Christmas carols, folk songs, all sorts of pop songs, movie music, and so on. This is simply the most common 2-chord combination in music. So if you master it in all 12 keys, you have something that is hugely important. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Leave comments about anything you like, comments about anything you'd like to see in the future, and remember that I consider all suggestions.